this year's election. She also works behind the scenes for the party, being the campaign leader for the most successful Greens elections in 2018. We're also joined by Rabina Khan, a Bangladeshi-born British writer, politician, councillor for Shadwell District in East London, community special advisor to the House of Lords in Britain, a community worker with a new book out, My Hair is Pink Under This Veil. Rabina stood as candidate in the elections to the European Parliament in 2019 and is a passionate campaigner for green investment and climate change issues, fields that have a huge impact on women's lives, but still suffer from a lack of women's perspectives and voices. So, Rabina, Melody, thank you both so much for joining us today. As I was learning about you and your experiences, your public service, I noticed that you both embrace your roots and the countries and cultures that you've integrated. For example, Melody, your tagline is "Born in Tehran, made in Utrecht." And Rabina, in your book, you mentioned that you feel British, Bangladeshi, and European. So these complex tapestries of identities cannot be reduced to simple and clumsy stereotypes. Rabina, could you start us off by sharing your experience with multiple discrimination? As a woman of color, a woman of faith with a migrant background, what role do narratives have in shaping how people feel and act towards migrants and refugees?
Thank you for having me on, Jaimie, and everybody else here, and for all the viewers here who are watching. So I came to the UK in 1975. My father had migrated to the UK when he was 19. He worked in the London docks, and he was a docker. And when we came in 1975, we settled in a place called Rochester in Kent. We were the only family of colour on the street that we lived on. I was also at the time the only child of colour in the school that I went to. So I never saw people who looked like me or someone of colour in books or my peers. And I often longed to see someone like me in a position of authority, someone who's a teacher, someone who I could actually say, oh, hold on, you look like me, you speak the same language, we pray in the same way. And so what we found ourselves in that time as migrants, especially my mother, because my mother's first language was not English. And so she was subject to discrimination and abuse as a woman. So one example was, I still recall when she used to line up in the supermarket waiting to pay for her goods. People used to push her out of the queue. She had me holding her hand, my brother in the pushchair. And often there were people who knew that we didn't eat pork, would specifically put pork sausages in our trolleys. And when we went to pay, when my mum went to pay for her goods, she was often accused of shoplifting, or often said that she couldn't afford money. And my dad was, earned very well. He always made sure that we had enough to eat. Mm-hmm. And I, as a child, often saw that discrimination. And I still recall one moment when I was 7, 8 years old, I watched how my mum was discriminated in the supermarket just because she couldn't find the eggs. And when we paid for the eggs, the woman at the till was very, very nasty to her. And as we left, I was so angry. I pulled this egg out of my mum's shopping bag. I ran back to the till and I said to the lady, "This is your change." And I smashed the egg on the till because that was me as a child responding because I'd witnessed this discrimination. And so for many years, I saw that, but I also saw the side where we as neighbours came together, that we celebrated the harvest, the Easter festival, but also as us as Muslims in Bangladeshi, we shared our culture of wearing a sari, celebrating Eid, Ramadan. All of that part of it is making your host country your home by showing who you are, but also embracing the values of the host community. And I think somewhere along the line, we found a consensus. And in those days, in the 70s and the early 80s, there was a huge lack of diversity. There were not very many diverse communities. And we, as I look to my children now, who are grown up, and I mean, my eldest is 26, I've got a 21-year-old and I've got a 10-year-old. Their childhood is very different to what I saw in the UK. And yes. I believe that women, Muslim women, and particularly women from refugee backgrounds, have a huge role to play in this country. we are here, we can be part of British society, we can integrate, but whilst we understand that there is discrimination, we also have to look to the government and to policymakers to ensure that we have policies that do not discriminate, but uphold our values, but also push us forward. We know women of colour are economically discriminated, they are disadvantaged, there are structural inequalities in place, and particularly what we have seen in post-COVID and a Brexit era. So I will stop there, and I'll leave it to you now, Jaimie.
Thank you so much, Rabina. Yes, it's really shocking, but also I love that you went back and gave the change to the nasty, nasty cashier. Already standing up and showing guts, you know, your true authentic self. I'll turn now to Melody. So you've mentioned in our first exchange that you don't like to use labels in politics, but that sometimes they're necessary in order to tease out complexities around discrimination and to find solutions. How was your experience finding your place and navigating in a society that perhaps wanted to slap labels on you without knowing who you were really inside? If you could just speak to that for a minute or two.
Of course. First of all, hi Jaimie, hi Rabina, and all the viewers. I think it's super cool that you're organizing this meeting about this very important subject. Very glad to be part of it. And as you said, Jaimie, I was born in Iran, in Tehran, and I came to Holland when I was 15 as a refugee. So for me, as a teenager who was a refugee, it was very important to find out my identity. Where do I belong to? Because I was born and lived for 15 years in the Middle East, and then came to Holland, where I have been living my whole adult life and have memories, have my friends, have my home. My whole life is here. So in my early years, it was really for me, looking and searching. I think it's also something where many young people are dealing with. Where do you belong to when you are coming from another country and living somewhere else? And actually, in that process, I decided not to choose one country. I'm really proud of being able to get to know the Middle Eastern culture. I'm very proud of to be shaped here in Utrecht, in the city where I live in Holland. So I decided to just make this slogan for myself: born in Tehran, made in Utrecht. And I think it says it all, that I'm proud of the both countries, and I want everybody to know that, and that's who I am.
It's great. It's a great tagline and extremely memorable. You don't forget, made in Tehran, born in Tehran, made in Utrecht.
Made in Utrecht, yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Melody. And to kind of conclude this first exchange, this first round, perhaps we could do a brief reflection on perceptions and visibility of one's faith, especially as elected women. Often those who embrace their faith face difficulties to be accepted. And in fact, here in Belgium, the first woman councillor in Ghent to wear the veil or to wear a hijab, her name is Hafsa El Baziri. She actually received numerous derogatory messages, even death threats on social media last week, following her appearance on a TV show for a debate. So, Rabina, in fact, you took the decision to wear the veil, I think it was in your 20s, and are very familiar with these issues and these discussions. In your opinion, what can we do to counter abuse against elected women, particularly when it's coming from a place of sexism and Islamophobia?
Yeah, so it has been a very difficult time for me in public life. It has been a very rewarding time. I've met so many heroes in my life and been able to stand up for the things that matter to me, from climate change to standing up for women's rights. But with it has come the risks of being discriminated and being abused. And for example, in 2015, when I stood as an independent candidate against a mainstream political party in the mayoral elections in Tower Hamlet, I came second. Who would have thought an independent candidate like me wearing the hijab could possibly come second? But it shows that people are willing to give you the opportunity to stand up for them. But in that time, there was a white man who, after I spoke at the hustings, I went up and spoke to him and he came to speak to me and he asked me what colour my hair was under my veil. And that's the title of my book, My Hair is Pink Under This Veil, because I responded back to him and said, it's pink. Now, I obviously didn't ask him as a white man what colour his hair was before he went bald, because that obviously would be rather insensitive. And so sometimes I respond into discrimination and certain questions with a sense of humour to quash that notion that women like myself who wear the veil do not have an interest in fashion, vibrant colours. We don't actually have opinions, and that's the way I've responded. But in terms of discrimination, for example, Jack Straw, the MP from the Labour Party, to the current Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has made screwed remarks about Muslim women, from letterboxes and bank robbers. And I've written about it because I know how incredibly difficult it is for Muslim women. It impacts on them. And I will share this with you all today. Last Monday, as I travelled back from Walthamstow on the Central Line in London, I went to campaign with one of my colleagues. I was on the train with my colleague and friend Caroline Pigeon, who is a Greater London Assembly member. And on the way back, I was abused terribly on the Central Line. I had to have another man who stood up for me so that this man would not be so nasty. And Caroline was horrified by the way I had been treated. And she actually took photos of him while he was doing this to me. He then, as he approached the station that I wanted to get off at, he left the station. And as he left the station, he said a few words, which I'm going to, I can't reveal to you. But I didn't get off that particular station, because he would have been waiting, and I don't know what would have happened to me if I got to that station. So I chose to get off another station and then walk all the way back to my destination. Now, that particular incident is being investigated by the British Transport Police, and I will be giving my evidence in my statement. But that's an example of what we go through from women, from people not wanting to sit next to us on the tube. But what does it do for me? It makes me a stronger person, because I am here. I would like to be respected. I believe that I should be respected. I have opinions not just on race and religion and faith. I have opinions on climate change, which is really, really very personal to me. Campaigning for life sciences in the aftermath of the European Medicine Agency, which exited from my borough. I am Rabina Khan. I am not just a woman who covers her hair with a veil. I have opinions, I have aspirations, and we as Muslim women, we intend to take our narratives back, and we do not want politicians and policymakers and people in authority to tell our stories. And that's why I struggle and campaign to make sure that we have policies and structural policies in place that do not discriminate us.
Yes, thank you so much, Rabina. I mean, absolutely unacceptable what happened to you last week. We're going beyond hurdling of verbal abuse, but to you being actually made to feel physically unsafe and unable to descend the train when you had been planning to. And thank you for reporting. Thank you for raising up your voice, and your colleague that was with you for taking videos, because that's also, taking it to the next level and continuing to engage with a situation that you did not ask for. So kudos to your courage. Stay strong. And you are Rabina Khan. Nobody's going to tell you where you can be or what you can do or how you should look and what you should believe. With that, let's transition to our next segment, where I wanted to talk with you both about how you live inclusiveness in your communities through your actions and your leadership styles. Melody, I'll turn to you. You're very connected with the city of Utrecht and its residents in all their diversity. In fact, you recently lent support to a student-led effort to make a rainbow bike path, the longest rainbow bike path in the world, at 570 meters long, if I'm not mistaken. And it opened this month for International Pride Month. Could you just share with us briefly why this project spoke to you and what motivated you to help make it a reality?
Of course, yeah, it's a very exciting, fun project. It's actually asking attention for the LGBT rights in this Pride Month. And I think it's a very important to open the dialogue, especially at the campus of students where it's coming. And the students asked me to join and participate to make this happen. And I was really glad to be part of it. And I think it's very, very important. One of the most important parts of being a politician is, to me, listening to what people have to say. And so if you are making a policy, don't think for them, but let them think with you and about what they need from us politicians. And that is, for me, also the core of democracy, and which is really important for me. Also, from where I come from, is I really love to be part of now the country where I am. There is democracy, and I will join that. And I also want other people participate in that. So when the students came for this project to me, I think it is fantastic. And I wanted to help to realize that, and glad that it happened.
Yeah, it looks beautiful. I highly recommend to everybody watching, do a quick Google search of Rainbow Bike Path in Utrecht. It's quite stunning. It's really beautiful. A great project. And indeed, you're living this sense of making everybody feel welcome and making the city a friendly place for everyone who inhabits it, no matter what their beliefs or situation is. Thank you so much, Melody. I'll turn back to you now, Rabina, if I may. So while reading your new book, I was particularly struck by one line. I'll have to quote here. You were highlighting that in your district, the needs of Bangladeshi, Somali, and English families are in fact quite the same. So to quote, their first concern is having decent housing, schools, and opportunities for their children. Whatever the far right and populist politicians try to tell us, we are more similar than different. And in my experience, we share the same desires for fair play and common human decency. How does this conviction impact your style of leadership and how you work as a local councillor?
That's one of the fundamental beliefs that I have and values, is that everyone is equal to me. Everyone has needs. Everyone has aspirations. We have a huge East End white working class community in Tower Hamlet, and they have been a valuable source of vitality in the borough. They, generations, white working class communities in Tower Hamlet contributed to the Docklands, which is where the shipping industry was.
Mm-hmm.
And we shouldn't forget that. We need to value them, and we need to hold on to that rich history. And at the same time, we as communities, diverse communities, can engage with each other. But often the right-wing narrative in the media often attempts to divide us. And that's something I always stand against. I'm always trying to ensure that we call out on anti-Semitism, homophobia, whether it's making sure people have access to equal services. And so for me, when I carry out my duties as someone in public office, everyone is welcome to my councillor surgery. I will try to do whatever I can to support them and advocate for their rights. And so for me, when I talk about common decency, it is basically to be able to share those values and to implement them.
Thank you. So the door is open. Door is open, and Rabina is listening. You know, this line from your book, it really struck a chord with me, because it aligns very much also with how I see life and what values are important to me and my community. Thank you so much. And we'll do a follow-up here with Melody. So you've stated that you seek policy that does not talk about people, but with people. Could you tell us about how you're connecting with the young and the vulnerable in your community?
Of course, as I said, I think it's very important as a politician to listen to people, and just sometimes they come to us, and most of the time I think I have also to go to people in the middle of the society and find out what's happening there. Mm-hmm. And so during our campaign, I went to MBO schools and just talked to students about a lot of things, what I found out. And one of the things was, for example, that kept me really busy after these talks. It was about how difficult it is in Holland for some of the students, MBO students, to find an internship. And I started to research more on this topic after these talks, and find out that there is discrimination at the MBO internship market for Muslims, immigrants, and refugee students. And now is actually in Utrecht, we are the first city who are working on this issue to create equal rights for all young people. And we are not yet there to solve the problem because it's, of course, a very complex problem. But I think seeing the problem and taking action in the politics, that is really a very important step forward to make it happen that every young people in this country have equal rights to work on their dreams.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really true. And it makes me think of something Rabina mentioned when we spoke last week, that you've noticed that the highest performers academically are coming from Asian communities and Black minority ethnic communities, but that this isn't necessarily translating into job opportunities such as internships and apprenticeships. Yeah. Did you want to make any short comment on that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I called out, the British government, under the current government, carried out a report into racism in this country. It didn't find any institutional racism. There were fundamental flaws in the report. And one of the things that it identified and celebrated, and it rightly should celebrate, is that Bangladeshi, Pakistani, and Indian communities were doing very well at GCSE and A levels and going on to degrees. But actually, when they go into employment, that doesn't translate in the workplace. First of all, to secure the employment, to ensure that they can retain that employment, and then to progress. And that doesn't happen. And it particularly doesn't happen for women of colour and women who are Muslims. And that's because when they go, from some of the things that I have come across, some of the women change their names, so it's a more Western name to fit in, and they will ensure that they may take their veil off, or they will try to adapt CV in such a way that it looks more very as though they've lived in a more less diverse community. So they've done it in such a way, and the inequality of this impacts profoundly on senior and also women in public life. I don't think that there are enough women in public life from diverse communities. In fact, there are not enough women overall in public life, and we should be at that table of decision making.
I agree. Well, you've anticipated here my final question to you in this section, which was, well, in relation to where you find your strength as a woman in politics, but in your opinion, why is it so important to have diverse women involved in decision making? I guess give us the last word here briefly, and then we'll turn to our third topic, because I see we're already running out of time. So yeah, just another word on why it's so critical to have diverse women involved in decision making and policy discussions and leadership, even in the private sector. Yeah.
So I can give you an example. Is that I recently wrote an article about Muslim women and women from diverse communities, Black and Asian and ethnic minority communities. There was a whole debate around domestic violence and the increase of domestic violence during the pandemic, and which is right, it was across the world. However, there was a certain group of women who were left behind, and these were women from Black and Asian and ethnic minority communities. And I know this because as a councillor, I had to support a group of women who were trying to give support to women trapped in homes during the lockdown to violent partners. We have just had Abida Karim, who was murdered after 21 years of domestic abuse by her partner, aged only 39. And one of the things that we were doing was trying to communicate through Facebook by giving lipstick colours. So red lipstick was red. So what I'm trying to say is that when we deliver things, perceptions and policies, we've got to have the lived experiences of women from diverse communities.
Definitely. Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Rabina. And to our third segment for exchange today, we'll continue along the path of the topic of the COVID pandemic and its impact that it's had on refugee and migrant communities in particular. So we'll be looking at two sides of the North Sea. First, the UK, and then Holland, the Netherlands, where Melody is working. So the COVID pandemic has completely upended the lives of people across the world. And it's especially increased hardships among vulnerable and marginalized communities. So I'd like to hear both of your perspectives, experiences, stories on, what did you see going on in your community, particularly among migrant and refugees? So Rabina, if you could start us off with the British experience, I'd say we can do for 2 minutes, and Melody, follow your experience in the Netherlands with 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Jaimie. When lockdown began in March last year, the first lockdown, I immediately began to see that more and more families from Black and Asian and ethnic minority communities were becoming impacted. They are often from deprived backgrounds. They lived in cramped conditions. They also had poorer lower level graded jobs, which meant that they were in public facing, from bus drivers to security guards. And I know over the past year, I have known families in Tower Hamlets who have not lost just one member of their family, but multiple members. And the tragedy of it all is where I live, we have the London hospital just up where I live. And I remember in the December lockdown, I saw endless ambulances racing up my street to take people from the community, from my estate. And as a person who suffered COVID and a long-term COVID sufferer now, when I look at the reports that the government has done, I was already calling out that Black, Asian and ethnic minority communities were being heavily impacted by COVID. And the report, the PHE report done by the government, identified that, for example, Bangladeshis were twice as likely to die from COVID and being impacted by COVID than their white counterparts. And what it shows me is there's a fundamental, again, structural inequality that's happening in this country regarding COVID. And on my final thought, I remember a refugee mother who came last June, February, just before the lockdown. She was rejected at the NHS, the emergency services, because they told her she would have to pay for her to get treatment. She had injuries to her and both her sons. I've been supporting this refugee mother because at that point, there was no resource to public funds. We had to ensure that she was supported through charity, making sure that she could get free legal advice. But the emotional impact of migrant women is huge, from possible potential trafficking to human trafficking to exploitation, including mother and children. So as an elected member through the COVID, I've seen a lot of tragedy, but at the same time, I've seen a huge number of people coming out as heroes.
Okay, good to see that there is, though, on the other side, those who do step forward, and people like yourself who open their arms and their homes and their brilliant minds to help find solutions for those who are maybe, also very, very scared to go ask for help through traditional channels, or if those traditional channels cannot provide the help that they need. Melody, please share with us how has been the experience of COVID in the Netherlands and on refugee women in particular.
Yes, actually, one of the things I'm always working on is for the subject of equal rights of women. And I think COVID has been exposing so many things and also about these equal rights of women, all women, refugee or other women. And I recently, for example, read an article about how they have been testing COVID vaccines on side effects, mostly on men's bodies. So what about women? Both men and women have equal rights to a good health. And this is not only one example. If we think about this subject, we also must not forget about women's rights in our policies. For example, the integration process of refugees here in Holland. Studies show us that female refugees too often lag behind in the job market, and the policy is mostly made on needs of male refugees. And I believe this should change, and also fast, please. Because as politicians, we must have attention to specific needs of both men and refugee women, and especially because of COVID, minority groups will be more vulnerable when we come in a crisis time. post-COVID, and I think this is really important to have to have our eyes on it. And this is also at the moment one of the topics I'm working on to make a change. And it's quite still quite an unknown subject about how refugee women develop themselves in the market to make the best of their life. So I think this is an important thing to have our eyes on it, and I will work on that the coming time.
Excellent. Yes, there's clearly not a lack of talented, creative, brilliant women with a migrant background who, yes, because of structural barriers, as Rabina mentioned earlier, limitations maybe to transferring their competences if they studied in another country, having that be recognized in the country of arrival, and yes, just adapting to a whole new situation. It's a lot to juggle, but I'm glad to hear that you're out there and you're pushing for this, and I'm really excited to see what all of this brings in time. So time flies. We're out of time, 2 minutes over, but we've learned a lot, and I'm so inspired by both of your stories and both of your paths of public service, Melody, Rabina. I'd like to invite you each to have one last word of about a minute or less to finish off the session. So, Melody, if you'd like to say just your last word on all of everything we discussed today, please go ahead, and then the floor will go to Rabina after.
Yes, yeah. Well, all I want to say is that it's so important that we are having these meetings to talk about this very important stuff, because that's the first step to make a change, to make a world where everybody can be the best who they can be, and to make it possible that people can develop themselves. And I think that's very important. And as we started also, it will be very cool when we are living in a society where we don't have any labels, but unfortunately we need to make them now, because some people are, because of their labels, staying behind. And that is really important to work on that, to make equal rights for every human being. And thank you one more time so much for organizing this meeting to talk about this subject. It was really fun to be here. Thanks.
It has been fun. Thank you so much. Rabina, your last words.
Thank you, Jaimie, and thank you, Melody. I thought your words were really profound. They were really brilliant, the way you ended it. We've spoken a lot about inequality. We've spoken about the experiences of racism and women of colour being typecast to only speak about faith and race and racial issues. But actually, we have a much wider opinion on different things, from where I stand on regeneration, on climate change, on life sciences, and building a greener and more sustainable economy. And I know that we have all faced huge barriers, but having these panels helps as well. And there's an interesting quote I saw written during the COVID time on a pavement, which is beautifully decorated, that with even the darkest of nights, the sun rises. And I say that as women, all of us, we have struggled, and we always struggle, from the suffragettes to the, to right to the moment where we could get the right to vote. It's always been about us as women to be at that decision-making table. Why should men be making the decisions for us when we have every right to be at that table?
Can't say it better than that. Thank you, Rabina. So a huge thank you to everyone who tuned in today, or who will be tuning in to watch the recording on Facebook Live. Massive thank you to Rabina and Melody for taking the time to exchange with me this afternoon. It was a true pleasure, and I'm going to be looking forward to see what you have in store for us in the future. Definitely two amazing women to keep your eyes on. And with that, I'll give the floor to my colleague Grazia, who will share about the next events we have coming up this week for Refugee Week. Thank you again, ladies. It was lovely. Amazing.
Thank you, Melody. Thank you, Rabina, once again. It was really a pleasure to have you here. And you really gave us an insightful landscape of experiences and feelings as well. So it is very, very important that you speak up for what you are, for who you are, and for what you are doing. So thank you very much, Jaimie, for brilliantly moderating this event. And as for the next appointments that we will have on this Wednesday, same hour, so 12:30 to 1, another event of half an hour speaking about local and regional governments and their approach to ICT services for a better integration. And then on Friday, the last event, same hour, 12:30 to 1, the third and final event for Inclusities in this Refugee Week this year, where we'll be talking about second generation migrants and the political. So if you want to tune in with us and to try to unpack all these technical issues, we'll be very glad to have you with us. So thank you very much once again to all the speakers for this event, and enjoy your lunch break.
Thank you. Bon appetit.